purely by number of unique showings, 2022 has been the best year ever for anime films in the US by a long shot. And because I'm an insane person who has to try out every new anime that comes out each season, I'm pretty sure I went and saw just about all of them, which ended up being 15 different films in total. So let's just jump into it and talk about all the new movies we got to see on the big screen this year. And for simplicity's sake, we'll just go in order of their US debuts. Which is pretty convenient because it lets me start with probably one of the most fascinating films of the year, Belle. Belle is the latest in a string of several films by Mamoru Hosoda, in which he attempts to use burgeoning technology and internet culture to tell fascinating and emotional stories about the connections we form with other people. With this instance, putting a focus on how the internet can be used as a tool to reshape your own image. And the animated explosion representing the metaverse in this world is simply breathtaking in its variety and aesthetic. That said, this is definitely one of the messiest films Hosoda has directed so far. There are a lot of ideas and concepts that this plot attempts to juggle, from self-image to social anxiety to VTubing to internet community management to neurodivergence to child abuse, and not all of these elements blend together in a way that feels satisfying and cohesive. But what it lacks in cohesiveness, it more than makes up for in visual splendor, both inside the internet and in the IRL scenes, bombastic musical performances, and plenty of charming interactions that truly got me invested in these characters. Not quite Hosoda's best work, but more than worth watching to be sure. Speaking of emergent technology and singing high school students, next we have Sing a Bit of Harmony, a sci-fi school drama about the practical application of high-intelligence AI from Yasuhiro Yoshiura, creator of Time of Eve and Patema Inverted. Unfortunately, most of the sci-fi elements of this film fall completely flat. More specifically, the total lack of network security across the entirety of this story is mind-boggling considering the subject matter. The notion that Shion, our lead AI character, is supposed to be kept a secret as she attempts to act like a normal high schooler is fundamentally broken because she is so very obviously not a high schooler. And the chase sequence that takes up a large bulk of the third act just isn't very good. That said, the very genuine and complex emotions that these characters express over the course of the film are truly endearing. For as goofy as Shion is, she does have a way of really getting to the heart of someone's personal issues and helping them out in her own weird musical way. And despite not being particularly flashy until some moments near the end, this is a very polished and solid looking film. I'm still on the fence about this one, but at the very least I can say I was entertained in one way or another. January wasn't all soft sci-fi and high school drama though. It also gave us the first of several films based on high-profile Shonen Jump franchises, that being Jujutsu Kaisen 0, a prequel to the first season of the TV series directed by Sung-Hoo Park. It's tempting to say that Zero is just more Jujutsu Kaisen content, and to a certain extent it is, but, and perhaps I'm broaching a bit of a hot take here, I think I might actually like this more than the TV series. While Yuji is certainly a good lead in his own rights, Yuta's emotional instability stemming from his traumatic past and the way he relates to the other characters as a result, Maki specifically, adds a certain spice to dial up the intensity of the character drama. The presence of Rika, a spirit haunting Yuta as part of said trauma, feels directly in line with what one could expect from Jujutsu Kaisen, yet still feels distinct enough to be a fresh take on this world's power system. And the final twist with her at the end led to an extremely cathartic and emotional resolution. It's not the smoothest film overall in terms of structure, since it really does feel like it's adapting the manga chapter for chapter at some points, but the story is still entirely self-contained and might even be a decent watch without any context from the main series. Coupled with those incredible action scenes that Jujutsu Kaisen is known for, Zero was definitely a strong way to end the first month of the year. We'd get a few months break until the next film, but the wait would be more than worth it to see Pompo the Cinephile, the first project from Takayuki Hirao in over half a decade, and one overflowing with vibrance, personality, and a passion for filmmaking. Pompo is without a doubt the most visually gorgeous film of the year by a long shot, through a melding of inspired imagery, expertly polished animation, and lavish color design to fit just about any tone and scenario. And combined with its lightning-fast pacing and editing that still allows for each emotion to breathe to its fullest, makes for an incredibly fun movie experience. At its core, however, is an undying love for the medium of film. And, even more so, a desire to make art and create something for the world. It's a story about what gets left behind in pursuit of passion, the struggle to keep that passion alive, and what it takes to truly put yourself into your art. Even down to the casting of brand new voices against the talents of literal titans of the industry in order to convey the gap in experience between different characters, this film really has thought up and executed just about everything it needed to truly get at the heart of its message about filmmaking. While you could argue that it is too optimistic a take on the film industry, that optimism is part of what makes this film so awe-inspiring and worthy of being one of my new favorite films of all time. Keeping with the theme of artistic passion and performance, next we have Revue Starlight the Movie, a sequel to the fascinating art house musical drama once again helmed by Tomohiro Furukawa. Much like Pompo, this is an absolutely gorgeous film, quite possibly the best work Kinema Citrus has ever produced. Whether it's the sheer level of polish on the character designs and action sequences, or the outlandishly vibrant symbolism like a giraffe made entirely of vegetables, I would struggle to find a single moment of this film that strikes me as anything less than beautiful. Unfortunately, the story is one that I have a lot of conflicting feelings about, namely in that a large bulk of it just feels unnecessary. While I'm not gonna pretend I fully understood all of the TV series, I can at least say that the ending felt pretty definitive and mostly tied up all the loose ends it needed to. So adding on to that ends up creating a sense of repetitiveness with certain characters such as Kaoruko and Futaba. And there are even entire scenes in this film that feel mostly pointless and unengaging. On the other hand, some conflicts, like the one between Juna and Nana, feel like natural progressions from where they left off previously. While I would definitely recommend the film overall to those who enjoyed the TV series, I can't shake the feeling that part of this film seemed to miss the mark in terms of adding to the pre-existing story. After the dramatic intensity of the past two films, June had something a bit mellower in store with Fortune Favors Lady Nikuko, coming to us from veteran Doraemon director and animator Ayumu Watanabe. Nikuko brings us a surprisingly down-to-earth and ponderous slice-of-life tale about a young girl's experience with adolescence. Though lacking in a solid structure or forward momentum, the individual scenarios and conflicts are interesting enough to carry the film through. The character writing is incredibly nuanced and detailed, leading to some very enlightening conversations about growing up, neurodivergence, and parental relationships that even had me tearing up at the end. Admittedly, there is a lot of very juvenile humor that feels incredibly out of place and often had my eyes rolling all the way back into my head, but I don't think it's intense enough to fully diminish all the good around it. And while the overall presentation is lacking in that explosive pop a lot of other films had this year, the sheer consistency of it all is something to marvel at on its own and rarely misses a chance to enhance an emotional moment with some subtle cinematic flair. Definitely one of the milder films of the year, but still one that's worth seeing. Swinging hard in the opposite direction in terms of genre, we have The Deer King, an epic fantasy adventure for the directorial debut of former Ghibli animator Masashi Ando. Though I doubt it was entirely intentional considering the timing of the film's pre-production, the story ended up having a lot of crossover with the reaction to the COVID pandemic of the past couple years, as a mysterious plague spreading across the world is a notable plot point, and the ways different groups and factions react to and attempt to stop said plague bears some similarities to the real world, such as certain groups focusing solely on praying the plague away. The film manages to have a strong emotional core with the daddy-daughter road trip elements as well, showcasing Vaughn and Yuna as decently solid characters. And as you might expect from a former Ghibli animator, the film is quite gorgeous, whether it's the detailed and fluid action scenes or the stellar background art. On the whole, however, I do find a lot of this film's plot to be a bit underdeveloped, which might seem odd to say about a nearly 2-hour movie, yet there are quite a few instances where supernatural elements are just left unexplained, or certain character moments don't feel as clear or engaging as they could be, ultimately leaving me with a story that I honestly haven't thought about once after seeing it in theaters. While it is certainly a lovely treat to enjoy in the moment, it unfortunately doesn't have all that much that would make me return to it in the future. August ended up tying January for most new anime films, and what better way to start than with Inu-Oh, the crazy historical fiction rock opera from Masaaki Yuasa. Truly, rock opera is the best way to describe the second half of this film, completely dominated by captivating musical performances regaling us with classic Japanese epics, but with a modern audio twist, symbolically bucking tradition in favor of a more creative and truthful expression. It wears its mishmash of audiovisual elements on its sleeves, crafting a unique and exhilarating series of performances. Truly, this film is filled with non-stop bangers. That's not to say the story is without substance in any way, as it still puts a great deal of focus on the shape of one's birth and how one can rise above the lot life hands you in order to become truly fulfilled in your pursuits, as well as a heavy disdain for any obstinate rulers that refuse to see past their own noses and try anything new, leveling notable critiques against norms regarding art, authority, and even the appearance of one's gender. If this is what Yuasa was spending all his time on in the 4 years since Devilman Crybaby, it was absolutely worth the wait to jam out to one of the best anime films of the year. Shortly after that, we hop back on the pre-existing franchise train with Teasing Master Takagi-san the movie. I already did a whole dissection on how each season of Takagi-san has slowly been getting better and better as the result of adding anime original content, and this film being the capstone to, supposedly, finish it off is easily one of the best parts of this franchise. The gags and the teasing are just as humorous as ever, but the movie-length runtime encourages the story to shoot even harder for long-form narrative rather than episodic stories, which it achieves to phenomenal effect. Nishikata and Takagi have grown so much over the past few seasons, and yet this film still manages to put them in entirely new situations to show us even more sides to their already surprisingly complex personalities. While the visuals were only a modest step up from the TV series, it does still manage to add some unique flourishes to the background art and character animation. Plus, the soundtrack just goes full orchestral swell to hammer in the most potent emotional moments. It's been a long climb up from season 1, but damn is it beautiful at the summit. Speaking of long-running franchises, the last August film was Dragon Ball Super Superhero. This new entry was helmed by Tetsuro Kodama, the CG director for the Broly film as well as large chunks of Hugto Precure, so he seemed like the perfect fit for what would become a full CG Dragon Ball film. In that regard, I'd say the CG was pretty solid overall. I'm kind of amazed at how well these character designs translate to 3D models, and much like Broly, the action sequences are some of the hypest shit I've seen all year, with extreme uses of color and particle effects to put as much wow on the screen as possible. Character acting ain't half bad either, though some of the establishing shots showcasing the larger environments look pretty bad. As for the story, I can't really say it's just another Dragon Ball film because Dragon Ball has had a uniquely story-focused run of films over the past decade, but superhero kind of feels like what I would say if that weren't the case. The humor tends to lean more OG Dragon Ball, though the execution leaves something to be desired more often than I hoped, and there's nothing especially compelling about most of the characters. This was kind of framed as Gohan's big redemption, though personally I don't think he really needed one, but he still ended up being far less important to the story than Piccolo and Pan, whose dynamic is easily one of the best parts of the story. Overall, this movie is exactly what you'd expect, for better or worse. As fall slowly crept up on us, we ended up with a couple films in September that leaned much more towards the cozy slice of life side of things. The first being The House of the Lost on the Cape, directed by Shinya Kawatsura of Non Non Biyori fame. The film is based on a serialized novel that was published in the wake of the Tohoku earthquake disaster. And as such, the story tackles a lot of subjects relating to loss and the despair that comes from loss. And, much like The Deer King, it inadvertently draws a lot of parallels to how the world has dealt with the pandemic. Unfortunately, that's pretty much the only good thing the film has going for it. Between its plotting narrative, lackluster characterization, and generally unimpressive visuals, this one was easily the biggest slog of the year. By far its worst fault though is the character of Hiyori, a young girl who has been rendered mute by psychological trauma. And yet the writing couldn't find a way to give her any ounce of characterization outside of she is nice and happy until the trauma hit. It's a shame to be so down on this film considering its potential, but I very decisively did not have a good time with this one. Following that, we saw the return of Atsuko Ishizuka with Goodbye Don Glees, a film that falls sharply in line with her work on A Place Further Than the Universe. Much like in Universe, the biggest strength of Don Glees is how the core cast interacts. You definitely get the sense that these guys are really good friends, sparking a shared chemistry that carries just about every casual conversation on screen. The individual characters themselves aren't particularly deep or interesting, but that chemistry does manage to keep the film afloat. Aside from that, the story is unfortunately rather unremarkable. The main cast does a lot of teenage philosophizing, but rarely touches on anything deeper than just past the surface, and there are some plot points at the very end left entirely unexplained and border on the fantastical in an otherwise very down-to-earth movie. The overall directing and art style do go a long way in keeping everything nice and pretty through the use of very minimalist, yet extremely effective choices of color and set design, so I wouldn't say it's not worth seeing, I just wish it had a little bit more to offer in terms of overall impact. Don Glees was the last film from a new IP for the year, but we're still not done yet, as October brought us Mobile Suit Gundam Cucuruz Doan's Island, a remake of episode 15 of the original Gundam TV series. The story behind that is a whole can of worms, but in any case, this is basically a Gundam side story that expands the original episode to feature length, both by adding in some clever political theming that fits perfectly within the story of Universal Century, and by significantly fleshing out Amuro's character arc, albeit in a fairly generic way. The expanded sidecast isn't particularly noteworthy, but neither are they annoying or poorly written, and Doan's internal struggle over how to truly help the world around him is decently engaging. The animation is certainly movie quality for the most part, though I'm not quite sure the character models have translated well to the digital age. And though the action is impactful and exciting, it's still disappointing to see Gundam of all franchises resort to CG mechs. To be honest, the best thing I can say is that the film is very thoroughly Gundam, by which I mean there is a point in the movie where a character is squashed by a mobile suit, and then no less than 5 minutes later we get a postcard memory of Hayato being headbutted in the ass by a goat. And if that isn't a perfect encapsulation of Gundam's mastery over tone shifts, then I don't know what is. I've kinda run out of clever transitions at this point, but this next one needs no introduction. One Piece Film Red, helmed by Goro Taniguchi of Code Geass fame, is by far the most surprising anime film of the year with just how fucking good it is. I never would have thought that a One Piece film centered around a pop idol would be so amazing, but the intense focus the film places on Uta, be it narratively or sonically, elevates Film Red to the very top of the shonen movie pile. Uta is easily one of the most fascinating and endearing anime characters of the year. And without spoiling too much, the way this film digs deep into her internal psychology and the series of choices she makes throughout the film had me completely glued to the screen. On top of that, bringing on J-pop star Ado for Uta's songs was pitch-perfect casting for the character, and I haven't been able to stop listening to the soundtrack ever since. The visuals also deserve notable credit for enhancing the many musical sequences, blasting the frame with such a near uncontrollable vibrancy of color and imagery that I'm left utterly mesmerized by the time each sequence ends. I'm normally hesitant to go all in on an anime whose entire appeal is a single character, as the non-Uta parts of the film are just kinda okay until Shanks shows up and rivals Uta for stealing the show, and I could definitely nitpick the editing and pacing of certain moments, but I am so absolutely in love with the concept for this character and how it was executed that I made it the only film this year I saw in theaters twice. Sasuga Oda, Sasuga Taniguchi. Last, but very certainly not least, we come to a film quite literally almost a decade in the making, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time, Hideaki Anno's final statement on his magnum opus. Of all the rebuild films, this one has far and away come the closest to embodying the spirit of the original Neon Genesis. A story overflowing with deeply intimate moments paying careful attention to the emotions of its broken and battered main cast. All set against some of the most beautiful background art I've seen from any anime this year, and paired with finely crafted cinematography that draws every last drop of emotion out of each scene. For once in his life, Shinji is finally around people who recognize his trauma and are actively doing everything they can to help him get back on his feet in their own ways. And the way the film breaks down so many aspects of life and society that we take for granted, while very on the nose, does strike at some poignant ideas. Admittedly, this film still isn't without its problems. The religious babble is the most excessive it's ever been, the huge fight scene right before the final climax wasn't all that good, and I kinda just sat there being assaulted by flashing lights for 10 minutes, and there's that one scene that had absolutely no reason to exist, but none of that managed to put too much of a damper on the final resolution to the conflict between Shinji and Gendo. In a barrage of ideas and emotions so disturbingly powerful that I damn near started crying in a theater full of people. A theater that, surprisingly, had the most populated showing for any anime film I saw this year. Just like it did back in the 90s, Eva continues to draw audiences in with a fine eye for character writing and served as a strong end to a year of anime films at the theaters. Is what I would say, except that immediately upon walking out of the Eva screening, I could hear the quintessential quintuplets movie playing literally in the next room over. A film that I had no idea was getting a US screening. Since I brought it up, no, I didn't see the Quince film because I dropped the anime halfway through season 1, but how cool is it that there was a day this year where you had a choice of 2 new anime films to see at the theater? Fucking wild. The reason I decided to put all of these reviews into one video is because I wanted to show the incredible variety of anime available to watch. Not a week has gone by in the past several years where I don't see someone complaining about how all anime is the same now, or how it's all too derivative, and I just can't let statements like that stand without showing people just how much diversity of genre, presentation, and perspective there is. Whether it's additional entries from historic franchises, or new IPs with a fresh story to tell, fantasy epics filled with action and adventure, or crazy art house wonders digging as deep as possible into their themes, legendary creators coming back for more, or relative unknowns looking to make their mark, there is an endless well of creative and captivating stories to uncover. And this is just 1 year of movies. If there's this much diversity from a little over a dozen films, imagine just how many different TV shows there are. There are so many incredible stories out there just waiting to be discovered. All you have to do is look for them. Special thanks to Rourke Tenjoin, Chris Adili, Ryan Johnson, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.